Vertumnus Caesar is the fourth full-length album from Malokarpatan, a Bratislava, Slovakia-based heavy metal band, a black metal band by most standards, and one that variously incorporates folk history, real history, and elements of traditional heavy metal and hard rock, as well as progressive rock into their sound. Their intent is a classic and idiosyncratic form of European black metal, and it is the ancient sort of 80s style in when we get down to the very bones of the experience. That means there's a lot of personality to it, and that's what I think will strike most people, even if they're never going to understand a word of the Slovakian dialect. You'll at least get that there's a big personality here, and the presentation is a big part of the effective, the efficacy of the listen. So the up front, I think that the sort of thrashing new wave of British heavy metal and black metal in the 80s comes together on maybe early Master's Hammer records. Maybe we could talk about Tormentor and a lot of bands that were influenced by Venom, like Cat and stuff like and groups like that. And we arrive to the feeling of their early work. Over time, the second record, which is when I noticed the band back then, was more of a it was definitely have these fits of heavy metal that would spike out, and uh, they were pretty inspiring at the time. I think that it seemed like the band was just making something catchy and fun, and I don't know if fun's the right word, but there was so much to it that they gained a following pretty quickly, and their big sort of, I guess, point of notice was their third album. And I guess getting right to it, we'll find that this album uses that standard as its medium, improves upon it here and there, and then tells a different story in a more complete way this time around, with, I think, both more fanfare, more indulgence, and, not always taking it too seriously, but always presenting a serious product. So we'll cut to a clip here and just get an idea of, maybe at least the signature of the guitar work on this album. So the problem with wanting to find conversational heavy metal records every week is that sometimes you'll find records that you'll want to talk on and on about over and over, but then the conversation doesn't always warrant any substance, and the music isn't exactly as exciting as the ideas that it brings up. And I was afraid that would be the case because the subject of Rudolph II would be really interesting to anyone who's interested in European history, the Holy Roman Empire, Eastern Europe in general, and Bohemia and the kingdom and all that. And I think that this does threaten to overtake, the scope of the album. But what they do here is they focus on the occult, the unknown, the hidden knowledge that he'd been seeking his entire life, and that sort of becomes the central narrative of this. And I think they do well to focus on that because there's so much of his life that is interesting. And I spent many hours just listening to the album, just reading about his life and some of the people that he affected, and like his illegitimate children and the murders they committed and all kinds of things. It's really interesting to go off on those tangents. But the songs here stick to those occult related subjects and the mysterium of it all, I guess. And that means that the record's tone matches that, and it does fit well with their style, which is an idiosyncratic sort of much more heavier on the synths this time around. It's the little bit more speed in the pace compared to the last record. The sound is a little bit more bright and clear. The rhythm section still sounds mostly 80s in terms of how the drums are presented, and it still has that classic late 80s, early 90s black metal feeling to it. I think it's the most important thing is that we do get the blasting parts and all that. So if you felt like this was going to become your new favorite epic heavy metal band after the last record, this is, I would say, more clearly a black metal band. And I think a fan of like Negative Plane will understand what that means, especially if you kind of sit with this record and The Pact uh, in the same day. They're both very elaborate works that are impressive in a similar way, and they tell a story with that same high standard applied to it. So, without going on and on, and I feel like this is one of my favorite records of the year. I kind of saw that coming based on how much I liked the last record, and I think you can't really go wrong with this style of black metal if you are a fan of heavy metal inherently, because it does reach back to the as far back as the early '70s for some of its idiosyncratic synth choices, some of the tunefulness of it, and some of the obvious references. If you grew up listening to everything from Sabbath to the Scorpions, you'll understand why some of these riffs might stand out in your mind and catch your ear. But beyond that, it is black metal, and it'll get you there as far as being a fan of that as well. So uh, again, this is probably one of my highest rated records of the year among just a few. I think that it lends itself really well to not only repeat listens, but fine art design. The sound design of it is perfect. I think that sitting there and learning about all these things, that's going to stick with me just as long as the music. And I think that anything that it enriches in these multitudes of ways deserves to be celebrated. And it helps that there are riffs. It helps that the songs are catchy and that the performances are impressive and full of personality. So it all comes together for me. We'll see how long it lasts on my shelf overall. So there's still a little tiny 5% uncertainty there, but otherwise a great record, and one that is, again, one of my highest recommendations of the year. We'll go ahead and check that out when it releases this weekend, and read the review if you'd like more detailed information.